This video is about making Sri Lankan beef curry in an instant pot. So first let's talk about a cut of meat that you would buy. This one I'm using is a chuck roast. So it typically comes tied up in string, so you can roast it in the oven on a low temperature for a long period of time to get it tender. This is a really good cut of meat. Another possibility is top round or stew meat or anything that's sort of a little tougher, cheaper to buy than steaks. So, what I generally do is cut off any large chunks of fat that are visible. This is to make the curry more healthy, and you won't have a large pool of oil at the top of your curry once it's done cooking. Also, any sort of leathery parts that might be tough to eat, so you would cut those off. Any sort of visible fat, sometimes you can pull the meat apart and cut them out, like I'm doing in the video. A little bit of fat left over is totally fine. It's just the larger pieces that you would want to remove. Another important thing when you start cubing this meat is that whenever possible, you cut the cubes against the grain. So the grain is sort of the direction in which the muscle tissue of the meat runs. And this is pretty visible when you're looking at a piece of meat. So let's cut off a chunk, get rid of the fat that was trimmed off. And so here you can see the grain of the meat that runs from top to bottom, from near my thumb downwards there. So you want to cut exactly horizontal to that. So I'm just going to cut a full slice here and then make sure that at least some of the cuts are directly horizontal to the grain of the meat. Because if you cut with the grain, then it takes longer to get the whole thing soft. And if you cut against the grain, then it's a much faster cooking process. It also helps if your meat is slightly frozen. That way you can get nice sharp cubes. But you have to time it just right. Otherwise, it doesn't work out. And also, it's kind of sometimes easier to make this curry as soon as you bring the beef home because then you don't have to freeze it and defrost it in the first place. The video is going to speed up here because it does take quite a bit of time to get all the meat trimmed and cubed. So I'm using about 2.5 pounds of chuck roast, and I think that for a curry like this that takes a lot of time and effort and cutting and chopping, it's really worth it to do a fairly big curry and freeze portions rather than, repeating this effort frequently. So if I am making something like beef curry or chicken curry, uh, basically taking the time to simmer meat for long periods of time, then I make sure I make uh, enough for more than one meal. So here's the finished product. And I also have the chopped tomatoes, the um, tamarind concentrate, and the garlic and ginger curry leaves. They're all minced fairly fine. And then also the chopped onion. And the recipe with quantities and details are in the comments of the video. Those are some cubes of coconut milk. You can look at my blog. This is a very handy way of storing coconut milk once you open a can. Also, that was coconut oil. Let's marinate the meat. So I'm going to put salt first, and then stir it around and then add more things in there. So salt is really actually very important to start with. And then I'm using curry powder and chili powder in almost equal amounts, and then turmeric, a little turmeric. So do look at the recipe on my blog, and it's printable and very handy. So all the quantities are listed there. So make sure you sort of stir it in, and then it coats all the pieces of meat. So everything is seasoned well. I'm using cardamom and cloves. The cardamom, make sure you peel off the cardamom, and then I like to um, pound them into a fine paste, and then just sprinkle it on the meat because I don't like to eat large pieces of cardamom and cinnamon and all that while you're eating the curry. You bite into one of these things and they're pretty strong. So instead, I have this little stone mortar and pestle that is very handy to just sort of um, rough grind any spices like that. Heat up your Instant Pot on the saute setting, add some coconut oil, and then you're ready to saute the onions with some salt in the Instant Pot. When the onions are halfway done, you can add the garlic and ginger and curry leaves, and then saute them for more time until everything's softened. Next, you can add the tomatoes. And at this point, the saute setting is pretty hot. So I'm gonna let the natural sound, cooking sounds come through so that you can tell how hot it is when you add the beef. Now you can stir it around to make sure that the beef is sort of getting a cooked outer coating on most of its pieces on all sides. Now let's speed up the video. When it's mostly done, add the tamarind, continue cooking until everything's got a cooked outer coating on it. And then it's time for the coconut milk cubes that I store frozen, and then also the water. Just enough liquid to cover the meat is all you're looking for. Then on the Instant Pot, you can press cancel to cancel the saute setting, and then put the lid on. And once the lid is locked in place, you can select the meat slash stew option and crank up the time to about 10 minutes for about 2.5 pounds of chuck roast. Once the 10 minutes is done cooking, you can let it natural release for at least 20 minutes, and then the curry is done. You can open it and check it out. It needs a good stir, and then I'll do a taste test for salt, and also let's take out a piece and check how done it is. So it should be tender enough that I could break the piece apart with the spoon, and that's a pretty good test as long as it's not mushy and falling apart.